Ground beef, one of the most versatile, nutrient-dense foods on the planet, and if you are eating a carnivore diet, you're gonna be using a lot of it. In today's video, I want to share with you my top ground beef recipes that are super simple and that are my go-to whenever I need a quick, nutritious meal. I'll also share with you the macro breakdown for each meal so you can get an idea of the protein, the fat, and the calories. So let's dive right in. First of all, though, I want to do a quick mention of the ground beef that I've been using exclusively since December 2023, and that is American Wagyu 80/20 ground beef from Ozark Valley Wagyu. The main reason I have exclusively been eating this ground beef is the taste. It is so buttery and delicious, and it's unlike any ground beef I've ever had in my life. American Wagyu cattle are known for their delicious taste and their healthy fat profiles. It's not like a Japanese Wagyu cow where it's like all fat and no meat. American Wagyu cows are known for having more meat than their Japanese counterparts, but that extra fat content makes their meat so much more delicious. Also contributing to that delicious taste is the fact that these are happy, healthy cows that are born, raised, and slaughtered all within the same area of Missouri. Ozark Valley cows are ethically raised without antibiotics, and they live the bulk of their lives on pasture. The price is also really good. You know, I could get a pound of organic grass-fed beef at my local grocery store for about the same price as this, but most of that's coming from like New Zealand or Australia, and that's fine, but why would I pay for something that's been shipped halfway across the globe when I can pay the same price for something that's less than 500 miles from my house? I like supporting an American ranch, raising American cows, and you can really taste the difference. If you'd like to try out any of Ozark Valley Wagyu's products, they also have delicious steaks. I love their ribeyes. I love their chuck eye steaks. Head to the description of this video and use code JENNY15 at checkout to get 15% off your order. And that code works forever. So if you become just as obsessed with this meat like I am, and you decide to order more, you can keep using that code and keep getting 15% off. Sorry to go on and on about this ground beef, but it's so delicious, and I really think you're going to love it too. All right, let's get to cooking. We're gonna start with a couple of ground beef breakfasts, and these really couldn't be any easier. I think that's one of the top benefits of the carnivore diet. It's just so simple, and you don't have to spend a lot of time in the kitchen. The first is probably the simplest, and that is ground beef and eggs. Fry up a pound of the Ozark Valley Wagyu, and then I like to mix up about 8 eggs. I'm using my immersion blender to get them really frothy and fluffy, so I don't have to add any dairy, but you could add a tablespoon or 2 of heavy cream into this egg mix to make it really tasty if you are including dairy in your version of the carnivore diet. I don't even bother draining the ground beef. I just pour the egg mix directly into the pan after the ground beef is done cooking. Cook that to whatever doneness you prefer in your scrambled eggs, and you've got a delicious breakfast, or really meal for any time of the day. The macro split on this breakfast is 70-30 with 130 grams of fat, 125 grams of protein, and total calories of 1,700. I usually like to split this up into 2 servings. And there's several variations to this. You could cook the ground beef and then put some like over easy eggs on it, or poached eggs, really whatever kind of egg you prefer. And as far as spices, of course, you can add some salt, but if you can tolerate more spices, you could add some garlic powder or some onion powder, maybe even some hot sauce if you can tolerate that. And you could also, of course, always use some shredded cheddar if you are including dairy in your version of the carnivore diet. Next up is a really great breakfast option for leftovers, and that is a breakfast casserole. We've got a pound of ground beef, and then I raided my refrigerator for leftover meat. I was able to come up with some breakfast sausage, some bacon, and some kielbasa. Cut up all that meat, put it in the bottom of a baking dish, and here I've got a dozen eggs. You could add, again, some heavy cream here if you're using dairy. I'm not gonna use any dairy today, so I'm just gonna use that immersion blender again to get it nice and frothy. Then I'm gonna pour that into the baking dish and mix everything up. At this point, if you're including dairy, you could add some cheese on top, or you could do that closer to the end of baking. It's up to you. I'm not going to be using any dairy today. Put this in a 350-degree oven for about 25 to 30 minutes, and then just check the center for doneness. When you're finished, you can cut this into 6 to 8 servings depending on your needs. This is a 70-30 macro split with 35 grams of fat, 34 grams of protein, and 458 calories per serving. Next up, you cannot have a ground beef recipe video without burgers and meatballs. I think everybody knows how to make a burger, but I like to put little chunks of things in my burgers to spice them up a bit. Here I've taken 5 pounds of the Ozark Valley Wagyu ground beef, and then I've split it into 3 portions. The first burgers I'm making are blue cheese and pancetta. The second burgers are ham and cheddar, and the third burgers are bacon and cheddar. I mix these up really good. I add whatever seasonings I'm going to add and then make them into the burgers, obviously. And then if I'm not going to be cooking them right away, I vacuum seal them into portions of 2. Each of these burgers weighs about 8 ounces when you add in the ground beef and all of the extra stuff that I've added in. Each of these burgers has a macro split of 70-30 with 44 grams of fat, 38 grams of protein, and 550 calories per burger. Now, if you're including some plant materials, like if you're doing ketovore or keto or just low carb in general, you could add like pieces of jalapeno or red onion, white onion, just make it your own. Moving on to the meatballs, these are super simple as well. I've got 2 pounds of the Ozark Valley Wagyu, and then to that I'm adding some salt, about half a cup of ground pork rinds, the original flavor, and then I'm gonna add in some cotija cheese that I grated myself, and some pecorino romano. Mix all of that up, and I'm planning on making 2-ounce meatballs. Oh, I forgot the egg. Let's mix that in as well. Don't forget the egg. That's really important. Like I said, I'm making 2-ounce meatballs, and I like to vacuum seal these into packages of 6. Macros for a serving size of 6 would be 72-27 with 73 grams of fat and 64 grams of protein, with total calories of 950. Let's move on to some super simple ground beef dinners, the first of which is my carnivore taco bowl. Take a pound of ground beef and then mix up all of these spices here. We are doing a tablespoon of cumin, a tablespoon of smoked paprika, and I spilled that all over the place, so whoopsies. Next up is half a tablespoon of garlic powder and then a full tablespoon of onion powder. We're gonna do a teaspoon of salt and half a tablespoon of chili powder, and then finish up our spice mix with a teaspoon of black pepper. Of course, you don't have to use any of these spices if you have a sensitivity to some of them, or you could just use like a taco spice pack, but I personally like to mix up my own taco spices so that I can control the quality of the spices that I'm putting into the mix. Now it's time to mix this up to combine everything together. Once the ground beef is cooked, I'm going to add a few teaspoons of the spice mix and then a little bit of water. This spice mix will make a few different servings, so you can just store it, but season your beef to taste. I ended up using 5 or 6 teaspoons of the spice mix. Then put the ground beef taco mix into a bowl and add your toppings. I've added about 3 tablespoons of sour cream and grated a little bit of cheddar on top of this, but you can add whatever you like. And if you're including plant material, you could add some onions, some jalapenos, some black olives, maybe a little bit of cilantro. You know, the world is your oyster. But if you are just doing carnivore, it is equally as tasty with just the ground beef, the taco seasoning, the sour cream, and the cheese. Next up is a delicious beef stroganoff over some carnivore noodles. I know for some people not having pasta can be really difficult, especially in that transitionary period when you are starting carnivore. Let me show you how to make the carnivore noodles. It's basically carnivore crepes that you're cutting into strips, and I found this recipe on YouTube. I'm gonna link the original recipe in the description below. She goes into so much more detail. It's probably about a 5-minute watch. So after this video is done, you can go over and really get into the nitty-gritty of how to make these, but I'll give you the Cliff Notes version here. It's really simple, but it does work better if you have a couple of specialty tools that are very inexpensive. The first is a crepe pan, and the second is a set of crepe flippers, specifically this one right here. So we're going to take 4 egg whites and 1 whole egg. Now you can change up the ratio of egg whites to whole egg depending on what you're looking for taste, but this mix works great in my opinion. Next, add 2 tablespoons of beef gelatin, and then I'm gonna use my immersion blender to get it all frothy and mixed together. This helps to minimize the chunks that could form from the beef gelatin. Now you're gonna heat up your crepe pan, and then you can add a little bit of butter, bacon grease, ghee, really whatever you want. I'm using some butter here. And you wait until this is nice and hot. And then you're gonna add in about 1/3 of the mix around the pan and kind of move the pan around to spread it around, and then let that cook. Now, when the edges start to curl up a little bit and they're turning a little bit brown, you know that it's time to flip it. Take the crepe flipper and kind of free up the crepe from the pan and then flip it over. Now, this does take a little bit of practice, but you'll get the hang of it. This batch of mix will make between 3 or 4 crepes, so just repeat the process. Now that we have 3 or 4 crepes, I'm going to roll these up one at a time into a little burrito shape and then cut them into thin slices. Be sure to use a sharp knife because this will make the process a lot easier. Then I'm gonna unfurl the noodles and put them into a bowl. This amount of crepe batter will make about 2 servings of carnivore noodles or 1 giant serving. The macro split on each serving of carnivore noodles is 3167 with 4 grams of fat and 20 grams of protein, total calories of 126 per serving. Now let's move on to the beef stroganoff. We've got a pound of the Ozark Valley Wagyu beef, fully cooked. Don't drain the fat here. We are going to leave that in. To this, we're going to add some bone broth. It calls for a cup of beef bone broth, but I only had chicken laying around, so I just used that. Add the cup of bone broth to the beef and let that simmer for a bit. And then you're going to add 4 ounces of cream cheese. I've cut this up into smaller pieces. And then let that mix and melt down at a simmer. I know this looks like a lot of liquid, but trust me, it reduces down quickly. Now you can season to taste. I think some garlic powder would be really good in here. Definitely salt and maybe some pepper. That has cooked sufficiently, I think. We've got our bowl of carnivore noodles and we're going to add this hot beef stroganoff mix on top of these noodles. This is 2 servings of beef stroganoff. So the macro breakdown is 75, 23, 2 with 65 grams of fat, 45 grams of protein and 3 grams of carbs and total calories of 800. If we add in 1 serving of the carnivore noodles, the macro split is 69, 29, 2 with 69 grams of fat, 66 grams of protein, and 3 grams of carbs with total calories of 925. Finally, I wanted to finish up with a dessert. This is chocolate beef butter bites. For this recipe, I'm going to be using some Element electrolytes. I've got a link in the description for a free sample pack with any order. So if you want to try this recipe, you could order a box of their chocolate, or they just came out with a chocolate caramel. Sounds delicious. And then you can use my code and get a free sample pack with your order so that you can try out all of their flavors. For this, I've cooked a pound of ground beef and then laid some paper towels down on a baking sheet. Now I'm pouring the ground beef onto this and then pressing out as much grease as possible. Normally I would not be doing this because, you know, fat is good, but we're going to be dehydrating this beef, so it is important for this particular recipe. Put the beef into the oven at 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and then I like to do 45 to 60 minute cycles in the oven. So I let it bake in there and then I pull it out, move it around a little bit, and then do that cycle a few times. I ended up keeping this batch in the oven for 5 hours total, and it's nice and crispy. Now I'm going to take some silicone molds and add the dehydrated beef into the molds. And then I've melted down a brick of butter. This is grass-fed butter from Kirkland. It's comparable to Kerrygold. It tastes really good. I'm gonna melt that in the microwave and then pour it into the silicone molds. Then I take my different flavors of chocolate Element and I sprinkle some on top of each mold. I'm going to put this in the refrigerator, but you could also put this into the freezer. Either one will work. And then when you pull it out, you've got a delicious, crunchy chocolate butter bite. This kind of reminds me of a chocolate crunch bar. Of course, it's not going to taste exactly like that because it doesn't have all the processed ingredients and all that jazz, but I really enjoy these. And it helps me add a bit of fat to my diet, or if I'm craving something chocolatey, this does the trick. As you can see, ground beef is a super versatile ingredient. Beef is the most nutrient dense of all the meats out there, and you're going to be using a lot of it, but it doesn't have to be boring. These recipes will help jazz up your carnivore menu. Let me know in the comments if you try any of these recipes. I'd really love to know what you think. Again, be sure to use code Jenny15 when you head over to Ozark Valley Wagyu's website and check out their ground beef and their steaks. Everything they sell is super high quality and absolutely delicious, and I think once you taste it, you're going to be just as addicted as I am to this beef. And with that, I'll see you in the next video.